Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 1. This is a Shakespeare play that gets a whole lot of love and is often performed, partially because it's easy to engage with the audience. It is something of a fairy tale, with lots of charm and magic and wonder. It also has a very playful plot structure, with not one, but 3 plots woven together. And on top of that, the entire play, overall, has a very magical and dreamlike feel about it. Now, when talking about the first act of a Shakespeare play, we're usually focusing in on exposition. What is our setting? Who are our characters? And what is the conflict? Whenever I'm teaching this play, I love to talk about plot, because Shakespeare is very playful with his plot structure in this play. So let's talk briefly about the 3 plots of this play before we jump into the action of Act 1. The first plot is the act of the 4 lovers. We'll get into their conflict in just a minute in Scene 1, but there are 2 pairs of lovers. Lysander and Hermia, and Demetrius and Helena. But all kinds of things have come into play in this story to scramble and confuse their relationships. And their conflict is really about sorting all of that out. But I want to notice that their setting is in Athens in ancient Greece. In fact, we throw a few mythological characters in here as well. For example, we get the ancient Greek mythological hero Theseus, and the Amazonian queen Hippolyta in this story. And although they aren't really central to the action, we clearly establish the beginning of this play as set in Greek mythology. But what's strange is that it doesn't stay there. When we get to the second plot, we have a bunch of what we will call the rude mechanicals. They're hardworking men who don't have a whole lot going on up here. They're great with their hands, not so much with their minds. And these uneducated, unsophisticated working-class Joes are the kind of people who would have populated Shakespeare's England. They're the kind of people he would have bumped shoulders with in the pub. And so once we introduce their plot, which involves them trying to put on a play, we find ourselves in something more like contemporary England. And then by the time we introduce the third plot, the fairy tale plot, well, we've shifted again. We're no longer in contemporary England, nor are we in ancient Greece, but in some Central European or British fairy tale. Well, that's a little bit confusing. So in exposition, we always talk about setting, but where and when is this set? Is it ancient Greece thousands of years ago? Not really. Is it contemporary England? Well, not really. Is it once upon a time? Well, that's closer at least. The real question is, where can we find a story that's set in ancient mythology and contemporary day and fairy tale all at the same time? There's really only one place where that happens, and that is in our dreams. And so the ambiguity of the setting adds to the overall dreamlike quality of the play, which is gonna be important as we go on. While we're at it, keep your ears open for references to sleep and dreams throughout this entire play. There's going to be a lot of them. And along the way, we're gonna want to answer the question, what is the Midsummer Night's Dream? Whose dream is this? Now that we've established all of that, let's look at the first scene. The scene opens with Theseus and Hippolyta in conversation about their upcoming wedding day. The myth of Theseus marrying Hippolyta is a pretty common one, and it shows up in other significant stories that Shakespeare was interested in. Two Noble Kinsmen is also a story set in this exact same moment. And in fact, there's a secret character in this play who comes from that story. It's almost like an Easter egg. But as I said, Theseus and Hippolyta are talking about their upcoming wedding day, which is only 4 days away. And yet Theseus thinks that this time is just passing so slowly. Hippolyta consoles him, saying that the time will pass, and so Theseus decides to basically have 4 days of parties leading up to their wedding to make the time pass faster. In any case, we discover that Theseus and Hippolyta are getting married because he defeated her in battle. Remember, she's the queen of the Amazons, the warrior women, who are incredibly powerful. And Theseus says, "I wooed thee with my sword." So the relationship began in violence, but now has turned into something merry. Of course, there are multiple interpretations of their relationship, and different performances take them differently. Some performances tend to play up that perhaps Hippolyta is still unwilling, but is being somewhat forced into this marriage. She's a prisoner of war who is now having to agree to this marriage because she lost the battle. But there are others that play up the affection between the two of them. It may be that Hippolyta was impressed by his fighting, and therefore has been won over to affection for him. There is a possible ambiguity here, especially since there's so much disruption in all the other relationships in this book. And one of the running themes in this book is the problems of love. Love comes with conflict. And even if Theseus and Hippolyta are played as very loving and affectionate to each other here, the origins of their love comes from conflict, which establishes a kind of tone for this overall play. The play does anticipate positive relationships, though, and it values the idea of love, marriage, and family, even though it recognizes that those sometimes come with conflict. One of those conflicts bursts into the door at this point in the form of Aegeus, a cranky old dad who is angry at his daughter for falling in love with the wrong guy. You see, Aegeus had this plan that he was going to marry his daughter off to Demetrius, but she's gone and fallen in love with Lysander, and Aegeus is very angry about this, and he can hardly hold it in. And his tone definitely creates a contrast to the talk of parties and weddings and fun. He is angry, he is bitter, and he wants to drag his daughter before the Duke as a judge. Basically, he's suing his daughter. And as her parent, he has all kinds of rights over her, including a right to let her continue to exist. He feels that Lysander has bewitched her and tricked her, and now he wants to force her to marry Demetrius instead, and if she refuses, as she has done so far, he wants to use the Athenian law to kill her. Of course, this is definitely a fly in Theseus's ointment, but he takes it in stride, and he tries to lay out all of the case. He points out to Hermia, hey look, Demetrius is a good-looking guy, he's a nice guy, why don't you just, make your dad happy and marry him? But Hermia is determined to marry the man she loves. Hermia is characterized by the way she stands up to Theseus and to her father. She's got a boldness about her. She's also got a rational approach to most things in this play. Now, she can be performed in a variety of ways, and I've seen a lot of different Hermias. But I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, her courage. She stands up for herself and doesn't just get pushed around by anybody. I do entreat your grace to pardon me. I know not by what power I am made bold, nor how it may concern my modesty in such a presence here to plead my thoughts. But I beseech your grace, that I may know the worst that may befall me in this case, if I refuse to wed Demetrius. So she has a boldness about her, and she's willing to stand up for herself in court, even if she's uncertain whether it's the right thing to do. A modest young lady may not necessarily speak up for herself in front of a whole bunch of men who are deciding her life in this culture. But this is so important, she's willing to take a stand for herself. We'll see later on that she makes rather rational decisions. Certainly she has her emotions, but most of her decisions are not driven by emotion, but rather by thought, unlike some of the other characters in this play. Theseus does say that there is an alternative to death. I won't execute you necessarily if you refuse to marry Demetrius, but I will condemn you to a virgin life. You will have to become a nun. Of course, we're in Greece, so this isn't a Christian nun, rather it is a nun serving Diana, the god of the moon, who's also the goddess of chastity. And he talks about the relative value of being a nun versus being a wife. He says, thrice blessed they that master so their blood to undergo such maiden pilgrimage, but earthlier happy is the rose distilled than that which, withering on the virgin thorn, grows, lives, and dies in single blessedness. So there is a value to being religious, but you will lose the opportunity to be a wife and a mother. Now, our current culture doesn't value family and marriage as much as Shakespeare's culture did. And in a lot of ways that's too bad, because there's a whole lot of delight and purpose that comes from the companionship of a husband and wife, as well as the meaning and rich reward of rearing children. And whatever your own feelings about that, to recognize that Hermia is being asked to have an enormous sacrifice, to be forever alone. and to give up some of the most fundamental relationships in her life is rather large and painful. But Hermia has absolutely no question. She says, "So will I grow, so live, so die, my lord, ere I will yield my virgin patent up unto his lordship, whose unwished yoke my soul consents not to give sovereignty. There is no way I'm going to marry Demetrius, so yeah, sign me up to be a nun." But Theseus is like, wait, think it over. This is, one of the biggest decisions of your life. Take your time with it. I'll give you until our wedding day, so you get 4 days to think this over before you make your decision. Don't rush into this. And at this point, Demetrius is like, "Give up, Hermia, you're all mine." And then Demetrius and Lysander suddenly start bumping chests for a few minutes. Lysander's clever line is, "You have her father's love, Demetrius. Let me have Hermia's. Do you marry him? Her dad loves you, why don't you marry him?" Okay, that's not that great of a line, Lysander, but, And Aegeus, of course, it just ticks him off, and he starts sputtering and yelling at Lysander as well. Lysander then presents his case to Theseus, because he's not had a chance to be heard yet. And he lays out basically like a T-chart. He's like, here's me, and here's Demetrius, the pros and cons. I am, my lord, as well derived as he, as well possessed. My love is more than his. My fortunes in every way is fairly ranked, if not with vantage as Demetrius is, and which is more than all these boasts can be, I am beloved of the beauteous Hermia. Why should I then prosecute my right? So he points out in every way he is equal in status with Demetrius, and above all of that, he has Hermia's love, so of course he's the better choice here. Not only that, but Demetrius, he says, made love to Netter's daughter Helena, and won her soul, and she, sweet lady, devoutly dotes in idolatry upon this spotted and inconstant man. On top of all these other ways that Demetrius and I are either equal or I have the advantage, Demetrius already has a commitment to Helena, which he's broken off so that he can chase after a girl who doesn't even want him. And so the story gets meatier. Helena is Hermia's best friend since childhood, and they've been so close together. And along comes Demetrius and starts dating Helena and makes all these promises to her, and then he sees Helena's best friend, Hermia, and he's like, never mind, I want that one. What a jerk! And so because Hermia didn't want to have anything to do with the guy who broke her best friend's heart, Demetrius goes around behind their backs and talks to her dad, and wins him over. What crazy drama! And Theseus is like, you know what, I'd heard that. You do have a terrible reputation, Demetrius. I'd heard that about you breaking Helena's heart. And I meant to mention it to you, but you know what, I was kind of busy thinking about my own wedding. And then he tells Aegeus and Demetrius that he has important business to discuss with them, but he's like, Hermia, I'm sorry, nothing I can do. It's the law. You gotta do what your dad says. So even though, yeah, I totally sympathize with you, but no, I'm sorry, the way things are, you're just gonna have to marry Demetrius, or decide to die alone. See you in 4 days! And so here we are under the Athenian law. And the Athenian law seems really harsh and cruel. And although it's ordered and although it's regulated, it feels out of balance somehow. And everything being imbalanced and wrong may have a reason that we'll get to a little bit later. Theseus and the rest of the court exit, leaving poor Lysander and Hermia all alone to commiserate about their misfortunes. And Hermia starts crying, and Lysander tries to comfort her, but all Lysander can really talk about is the fact that the course of true love never did run smooth. All instances of true love have always ended this way, and he mentions all these different scenarios where two people have fallen in love and it's fallen apart. There's a fun back and forth between Lysander and Hermia, which shows how sort of linked in mind they are. Lysander will start a statement, and Hermia will finish it for him, over and over and over again, in this parallel pattern, which again shows their relationship. In the end, when Lysander's about to throw his hands up because, true love never seems to work out, Hermia concludes, again rather rationally, since true love never does work out, we should, like all others, learn to be patient and to accept the way things are. And Lysander says, yeah, that's a good idea, but also, I have another idea too. Why don't we run away together, outside of Athens, where we won't be held by the law of Athens anymore? I have an aunt who's living out several leagues from Athens, where we can go and we can get married and we can live happily ever after. And Hermia is delighted with the proposition. And although running away from your problems and running away from home to elope with your boyfriend seems like a pretty rash decision, considering how irrational and harsh Hermia's dad is and how harsh the law is, it winds up being the most rational decision that they can make together. And Hermia makes this big vow, this solemn promise to Lysander that she will meet with him in the woods tomorrow night. Her vow is funny, though, and touches on the tension of love and conflict. My good Lysander, I swear to thee by Cupid's strongest bow, by his best arrow with the golden head, by the simplicity of Venus's doves, by that which knitteth souls and prospers loves, and by that fire which burned the Carthage queen when the false Trojan under sail was seen, by all the vows that ever men have broke, in number more than ever women spoke, in that same place thou hast appointed me, tomorrow truly will I meet with thee. Breaking this down, she swears by 6 different things, and there's a kind of progress through the different things that she swears on. She starts by swearing on the gods of love, first of all Cupid, and then later Venus. She swears by Cupid's bow, by his arrow, by Venus's doves. The 4th thing she swears on is that which knitteth souls and prospers loves. So love itself, or perhaps marriage. But then her vows take a kind of turn, and she swears by the fire that burned the Carthage queen. That's Dido. In the old story of Dido and Aeneas, they fell in love, but Aeneas had to move on, and so he rejects her and leaves her, and she, in despair, burns herself up. It's a long, complicated story as part of the Aeneid. But the fire there symbolizes the passion and faithfulness of Dido, while Aeneas is breaking faith with her. And the final thing that Hermia swears on is all the vows that ever men have broke. Men break vows all the time. In fact, they break more vows than women swear. And so although she's making this big elaborate oath, it's kind of a cheeky oath that points out, well, women aren't usually that inconsistent. It's usually the guys who mess things up here. And it's almost a little bit of a jab at Lysander, even though Lysander hasn't shown himself to be unfaithful in any way. And Lysander's response is, keep promise, love. Which, how do you say that line after she's just kind of jabbed at you? Well, I hope that you'll keep that promise. But before they can say anything else, in comes Helena. Now, we know about Helena, right? It's Hermia's friend that Demetrius used to be with before he ditched her. And her characterization here is entertaining. Again, there are many different productions of this play, and she can be played in multiple ways. But notice how whiny she comes off in her language. The first thing that Hermia says is, Godspeed, fair Helena, whither away? So, oh, it's my pretty friend Helena, where are you going? And Helena latches onto the word fair, or pretty. Call you me fair? That fair again unsay. Demetrius loves your fair. Oh, happy fair. Your eyes are lodestars, and your tongue sweet air, more tunable than lark to shepherd's ear. When wheat is green, when hawthorn buds appear, sickness is catching. Oh, were favor so, yours would I catch, fair Hermia, ere I go. My ear should catch your voice, my eye your eye, my tongue should catch your tongue's sweet melody. Were the world mine, Demetrius being baited, the rest I'd give to you, to be to you translated. Oh, teach me how you look, and with what art you sway the motion of Demetrius' heart. This entire speech is a complaint about, I'm not the pretty one, you're the pretty one, since Demetrius likes your beauty and he doesn't like my beauty. Now, Helena can also be played as very clever and sarcastic as well, but there's a kind of bitterness and whininess about almost everything she says. Don't call me pretty, Demetrius doesn't think I'm pretty. And then Hermia and Helena have this back and forth, which very much like Lysander and Hermia a moment ago, Hermia will say something and Helena will respond. But in slight contrast to Lysander and Hermia, it's a negative. Rather than the second person finishing the thought of the first person, the second person here inverts the thought. Hermia says, I frown upon him, yet he loves me still. And Helena takes that and twists it. Oh, that your frowns would teach my smiles such skill. And then Hermia keeps saying all these different things she does to try to drive Demetrius away. And Helena says about each one of them, oh, if only your attempt to drive Demetrius away would rub off on me and in some way attract him. And Hermia finally throws up her hands at the end and says, his folly, Helena, is no fault of mine. And Helena says, none but your beauty. Would that fault were mine. It's your fault you're so pretty. And Hermia finally confesses to Helena everything that they plan. We're planning on running away together. It's a secret. We'll let you in on our secret. And when we run away together, then you have a chance with Demetrius. Yay! But there's a subtle tension throughout all of this that maybe Hermia doesn't realize. She's basically telling her friend, don't worry, I'm gonna run away, and then Demetrius will be, left over to pick you up as his second choice. And also there's the sense that Hermia is abandoning Helena. They've been best friends since they were kids. And yet she's talking now about how much she hates it here in Athens, how she can't stand anything and she wants to get away. And she says, there my Lysander and myself shall meet, and thence from Athens turn away our eyes to seek new friends and stranger companies. So I'm gonna go make a whole bunch of new friends and, get really close to a bunch of strangers, leaving behind my old friends, which includes, of course, Helena. And she finishes by saying, good luck grant thee thy Demetrius. I hope things work out between you and Demetrius. And then she turns and makes a whole bunch of eyes at Lysander before she leaves, abandoning her friend. And Lysander pretty much reiterates the sentiment and then leaves himself, and Helena's left all alone. And she has this great speech, which is somewhat complicated. It's full of tempestuous emotions. She's so jealous of Hermia and her beauty, she's frustrated that Demetrius doesn't understand or see how much she loves him. She's frustrated with love in general. Love seems unfair and unjust. For ere Demetrius looked on Hermia's eyne, he hailed down oaths that he was only mine, and when this hail some heat from Hermia felt, so he dissolved, and showers of oaths did melt. So all of his love for her just kind of melted away at the beauty of Hermia's eyes. Helena keeps talking about Hermia's eyes. I haven't counted, but she mentions Hermia's eyes all the time in this play. Probably Demetrius said something about how pretty Hermia's eyes were, and it's just really stuck and burned inside of Helena's soul. She can't get over it. And so all of a sudden, in the middle of her speech, she has this moment where she realizes she's going to snitch on them. I will go tell him of fair Hermia's flight. Then to the woods will he tomorrow night pursue her. And for this intelligence, if I have thanks, it is a dear expense. But herein mean I to enrich my pain, to have his sight thither and back again. Now, why is she snitching on her friend? What good will it do her? Even she admits it won't help that much. Maybe I'll have thanks from Demetrius for 30 seconds before he goes and gets Hermia and marries Hermia instead of me. But sometimes when people are hurt and hurting and in pain, they feed on it and keep their pain as kind of a pet. And that seems to be sort of what Helena's doing here. And so we can see the conflict between these four lovers. What's going to happen? Now this is a comedy, so we expect ultimately for them to be sorted out and in love with the right person at the end. But for now, they're all gonna run off into the woods tomorrow night. And something's gotta happen there to turn things around. The second scene of Act 1 is the rude mechanicals. Now the term rude mechanicals is a term that a character later in the play will use to talk about these guys. Mechanicals just means that they work with their hands. And they're rude because they are unsophisticated. In Shakespeare's day, the word rude didn't mean insulting, it just meant that they were not very well educated, not very sophisticated. And that's clearly true of these guys. They're all working class guys who are probably very good at their jobs, but they're not very good at the arts or sophisticated things. They think they are, though. They're all introduced by their occupation. Peter Quince the carpenter, Snug the joiner, Bottom the weaver, Flute the bellows mender, Snout the tinker, and Starveling the tailor. And Quince has come up with this elaborate plan that they're all going to put together a play to perform at the wedding of Theseus and Hippolyta. And in so doing, they'll impress the Duke so much that they'll be recognized all throughout Athens. It's gonna be great. The major problem is that they're all kind of idiots. But the most notable of them all is Nick Bottom, who is a particularly hilarious and pretentious idiot. Quince has called them all together and he introduces the play. This is going to be the story of Pyramus and Thisbe, which is a story from mythology. It's very much a Romeo and Juliet-esque kind of story. Two young lovers who are in love but their families hate each other and they decide to run away together. Kind of parallels Hermia and Lysander. But their story ends in tragedy. Pyramus makes a mistake and thinks Thisbe has been killed by a lion when she really hasn't. And so he commits suicide, and Thisbe, finding him dead, also commits suicide. As I said, very Romeo and Juliet-esque. The real fun of this scene happens as Quince begins to hand out the parts. And he gives the biggest part, the hero's role of Pyramus, to Nick Bottom. And it seems that all the other men really think highly of Nick Bottom. He's like the star of their amateur theater group. And as soon as he gets the part, he starts strutting around and quoting poetry and talking like he can play any part at all. He's obviously very full of himself. But although they all think very highly of him, we pretty quickly realize that he's goofy. He has a bad habit of using the wrong words for things, what we call malapropisms. And so he'll take words that sound like the right word, but they're not quite right, which leads to some rather funny incidents throughout this play. Now, if you're somebody who struggles with Shakespeare's language anyway, you may not immediately hear these. But some of them are so bad that even an untrained ear should be able to hear the difference between deflowered and devoured. The lion devoured, my dear, not the lion deflowered, my dear. Quince then gives the lady's part to Flute, who's disappointed that he has to play a lady, and he's like, no, I've got a beard coming! In Shakespeare's day, of course, all parts were played by men. Women were not allowed to be actors. And so there's some comedy to it. But also, as soon as Flute protests, Bottom jumps up and says, I can play Thisbe too, I can play both parts. I'll just change my voice up and down. And I may hide my face, let me play Thisbe too. I'll speak in a monstrous little voice. Thisne, Thisne. Ah, Pyramus, my lover dear, thy Thisbe dear and lady dear. And they all have to talk him down from trying to play both parts at the same time. And Quince hands out all the rest of the bit parts to the rest of the actors, but Snug gets a little worried because he's not very good at learning lines. He's pretty dumb. Of course, he's got the lion's part, so there's no lines to learn, he just has to roar. But as soon as he expresses doubt about this, Bottom jumps up and says, oh, I'll play the lion too! I can roar so well, everyone will say, oh, amazing! But again, they all have to talk him down. First of all saying that, oh no, he'll roar so well that everyone will be terrified, and then they'll all get hanged for scaring the ladies. But when he starts saying, no, I'll roar gently like a little sucking dove, they have to convince him that he can only play one part, the lead. We have a few more jokes about beards, mostly at the expense of the French, when they finally decide that in order to keep their play a secret, they're all going to go out into the woods tomorrow night to rehearse. Now, where have I heard about the woods tomorrow night? Woods, of course, are very symbolic and interesting as a setting, something we'll talk about more when we get into Act 2. But that's it for Act 1 for now. Wait a minute! I thought this play had fairies in it! Where's the fairy tale plot? No, I didn't forget about the fairy tale plot. Actually, Shakespeare moves the exposition of that plot into Act 2 for a very important reason, which we'll find out next time. Thanks for watching. If you'd like more help studying this play, I have a lot of resources over on Patreon, as well as many other fun bonus things. And I'd love to have your support over there, where subscriptions to my bonus content start at only $1 a month. You can click to subscribe or watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.